Right. Right. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the notion of intersectionality, particularly when it comes to race and class, because we see that more and more manifested. It seems to me, and maybe not so much that it's manifested, but there's a consciousness of it that is
Hmm.
impacting the way that people organize, whether it's environmental groups or what's happening with Moral Mondays.
Yeah.
Talk to that aspect of what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, Moral Mondays is fascinating because it really, under the framework of Moral Mondays incorporated all of these things that the right usually tries to paint as explicitly immoral. So abortion rights and gay rights, and now in North Carolina with this really awful anti-trans people bill that tries to restrict whether trans people can go to the bathroom in public. They really incorporated trans rights, and what they did by saying that all of these things are connected, that these things are connected to the fact that the state government is also trying to restrict voting rights, which, by the way, the Supreme Court just said that they cannot do. That was yesterday, so that is an excellent victory for that movement. And that they were cutting budgets for schools, for Medicaid, at a time when we were supposed to be expanding Medicaid. They were cutting it. To look at this and say the same people are doing all of these things, the same people are backing the people who are making all of these cuts, right? The same few rich donors are donating to all of these politicians, and that our struggles are actually interconnected and they overlap in us, right? So I quote in the book Ivana Gonzalez, who's this wonderful young organizer, and she is the daughter of immigrants. She is herself a U.S. citizen, but she had a cousin who was in immigrant detention at the same time that she took arrest at Moral Monday. And she gave a speech about how, she is a student and her struggles on campus with her programs being cut and her tuition going up were connected to the struggles of workers on campus to get a living wage, which she was organizing with them, and that as an immigrant, her the relationship that she had with the state cracking down on her as an immigrant was related to the state trying to decide whether or not she could, as a woman, have a safe and legal abortion. And when it came time to explain to her parents why she had taken part in this protest and why she had gotten arrested, she used the example of saying that her cousin was in immigrant detention, and this is what happens to us in this country, and this is why I had to stand up.
It's really fascinating to me. I mean, first off, like were it not for Donald Trump attacking the Khan family, I think Barbara's
Right.
speech from that night would have been the one that people had been would be talking about extensively, because that was
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
it was an amazing speech, but also like I have a knee jerk reaction to just the idea of morality being used that
Yeah.
way. And maybe it is because
Yeah.
it's associated with a pastor. And I get a little bit like that. Like the tiny hairs on my back stand up just a little
Yeah.
bit on that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's also another way of saying like, there's a group of people
Mm-hmm.
who are immoral, and what
Yeah.
their whole policy set is immoral, and it's sort of
Right. Yeah.
you get away without saying that and making it sort of
Yeah.
more positive. It's a fascinating dynamic, and I wonder
Yeah.
like is that growing? I mean, because it seems like there was a lot of sort of disparate things. I mean, Occupy, I think, tried to sort of encompass a lot of different things, but
Mm-hmm.
it was Occupy Wall Street. I mean, it was focused
Right.
on
Yeah.
something that was financial, and we saw the
Right.
wildcat strikes with fast food and
Mm-hmm.
Walmart. And now it seems to be expanding out. And I feel like sort of part of that also came from the environmental movement. Like it seems to me that like folks like Bill McKibben and organizations like that have been
Yeah.
consciously trying to broaden their message to make I don't know, to recruit more people or
Yeah.
to just make people see the relevance in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the expansion and the changes in the climate movement are really fascinating, right? Like I mentioned this, pipeline blockade in North Dakota, right? That's being led by indigenous people. And the group of Black Lives Matter protesters from Toronto actually went down to join them for a few days. And there are people now, planning these trips from all over the country. And I like I said, I'm planning to go myself and cover it. And this is an example of like the environmental movement saying like, this is actually about people. It's not about like polar bears and whatever, which like polar bears are great, but it's really hard to get people who are having a hard time paying their bills to care about polar bears. But when you are saying like this pipeline is going to go through our water, then it becomes a lot more real. Or when you are people in, there's this wonderful group that I talk about in the book called Push Buffalo, and they're a community organization in Buffalo, New York, and they started doing a lot of work around, they had been working on housing, and one of the biggest issues that people had with being able to afford housing was also paying their electric and heating bills, right? Their gas and electric bills, because keeping your house warm in Buffalo in winter is really hard because Buffalo is really, really cold. And so when they're organizing around energy, then they start to think about what does that mean if we actually had clean, renewable energy that the community had control over, rather than these big energy monopolies that charge us whatever they want, and they're using the dirtiest energy possible, and they're paying more, and they want to, frack our communities. This was a big, the fracking fight was huge in New York, and Andrew Cuomo, contrary to what everybody expected him to do, actually, went for a fracking ban because he was pressured very, very hard by activists. And so when you start to see people like, low-income people of color in Buffalo seeing their fight for an affordable energy bill as a climate justice fight, and coming down to the People's Climate March and really saying, like, we are the front lines of climate justice, you have a whole different movement than the one that sort of was easily caricatured as, some white people who like to hug trees.
Right. I mean, you have those people from Buffalo marching in the same march with some farmer in Nebraska who's upset about the eminent domain aspects of this.
Right. Yeah. And with the the people who are now blockading this pipeline in North Dakota, and people who had been fighting the tar sands fight in the north of Canada, who are also mostly First Nations people up there. And you start to say like, oh, the climate justice fight is a racial justice fight, because all of this dirty energy gets extracted from the backyards of people who are poor and people who are Black and brown and Native, and they are the ones who have the dirty energy, or the trash dumps and the polluting trucks run through their neighborhoods. And they have, the South Bronx has some of the worst asthma rates in the country. And Michael Johnson, who's an organizer with South Bronx Unite, had this wonderful, we had this wonderful conversation where he was talking about Eric Garner. Again, Eric Garner was killed by a New York police officer who put him in a chokehold. And Eric Garner had asthma. And Eric Garner had asthma because he had grown up near the Gowanus Canal, which is a Superfund site. And, and so the people in the South Bronx who were fighting the location of yet another truck-driven business in their neighborhood were saying, we can't breathe, which is the same thing that, the cry that went up after Eric Garner's killing, because Eric Garner's last words were literally, I can't breathe. And so, to connect those again is really powerful.
And from a structural standpoint, I mean, there's been... Hello, you. I'm Sam Seder. Looking for smart progressive talk that is occasionally amusing? Well, subscribe to our YouTube feed. Subscribe to our podcast. Like us on Facebook. And just generally enjoy us.